When in doubt, add boost. Since the introduction of the modern sport bike, horsepower numbers and acceleration figures have been the main focus between manufacturers, ultimately leading to larger and larger displacement engines. The 700cc two-stroke engines of the 70s were seen as absolute overkill for its time, but as the decades progressed, 1000cc's, 1200cc's, and even 1400cc's have been becoming more popular. What came with this no replacement for displacement ideology was a heavier and heavier bike that sacrificed handling for all-out straight-line speed. The Kawasaki Ninja was no exception to this trend, going from its debut of 908cc's in the 1984 Ninja 900 all the way to 1441cc's in the ZX14R. Seeing this inevitable wall, Kawasaki would begin development of codename 8200, a bike that could reach even higher metrics of speed and performance while still retaining its agility on track. Codename 8200 would begin its life as a non-street legal racing bike and introduce forced induction back into the production bike category. Today on Explained, we will take a deep dive into what we know today as the H2R and how it became the fastest motorcycle you can buy. The 80s were a time of rapid technological advancement in motorcycle engineering and design, heavily influenced by the decline of the UJM design in favor of sport bikes. People wanted power above all else, and Kawasaki fed into that urge with the introduction of the GPZ 750 Turbo.
The Kawasaki 750 Turbo, built for speed.
Turbocharged motorcycles prior had only been a product of custom builders and drag racers who were seeking a death wish. But by 1983, Suzuki, Yamaha, and Honda all had turbocharged bikes in their fleet. The Turbo 750, though, was special. The turbocharger was mounted similar to what you would find in turbocharged cars, 4 exhaust pipes merging into a collector feeding the small Hitachi turbocharger, which reduced lag with its smaller diameter turbine and compressor. The 738cc air-cooled 2-valve per cylinder inline-4 was equipped with a Mikuni digital fuel injection and onboard computer that monitored RPM, throttle angle, and temperature to keep the engine alive. The compression was lowered to 7.8 to 1 from a 9.5 to 1 original compression since it was non-intercooled, and even with a measly 7 pounds of boost, it made an additional 35 horsepower, topping out at 112 horsepower at 9,000 RPM and a top speed of 150 miles per hour. It was the fastest bike Motorcyclist magazine ran down the quarter mile in 1983, turning a 1099 quarter mile at 123.2 miles per hour. Even though this bike was short-lived, it would give Kawasaki real-world feedback if factory-boosted sport bikes were actually viable. The biggest downside to these new age turbo bikes were turbo lag, the time delay from the twist of the throttle till the turbocharger creates positive manifold pressure and you feel the boost in torque. The difference between the naturally aspirated and turbocharged models was power delivery. With the naturally aspirated engines, the power is linear and predictable. With turbocharged engines, it was underpowered out of boost since its compression ratio was lowered, and when boost kicked in, it was like flipping on a light switch. The laggy 80s turbo designs, accompanied with added complication and weight, quickly revealed that high-revving naturally aspirated engines were still the proper recipe for sport bikes. The technology just wasn't there yet, and Kawasaki would put the boosted bike concept on ice for nearly 30 years. In the meantime, Kawasaki would develop the Ninja into multiple world's fastest claimed title bikes, like the Tomcat ZX-10, the ZX-11, the ZX-12R, and also the Suzuki Hayabusa competitor, the ZX-14. These consistently larger displacement engines, however, carried with them a dirty little secret: weight. You can only increase the bore diameter and stroke length so much until the engine block itself needs to be physically larger, with a larger bore spacing and a taller deck height, which ultimately adds more weight. Kawasaki realized if the next flagship Ninja were to set the bar of performance, a larger displacement engine wouldn't be the ticket, it would be boost. Kawasaki Heavy Industries is a large corporation with various groups, most known for their motorcycle and engine group, but they also have an aerospace group used for aerodynamic testing, a turbine and machinery group used for compressor design, and precision machinery group for welding and CNC machining. When tasked with developing the next flagship Ninja, Kawasaki motorcycle engineers led by Satoaki Ichi would reach across those divisional borders and utilize the vast array of tools at their disposal. The target for codename 8200 was 300 horsepower, as compact as physically possible, and a linear power band that would power a lightweight track special. The linear power band requirement disqualified turbocharging like the old GPZ 750, but KHI's turbine group would develop a new centrifugal supercharger that could meet the 300 horsepower goal and also be efficient enough to run without an intercooler. The non-intercooled design posed a challenge for heat management with concerns of detonation due to the high inlet air temperatures, so the supercharger compressor efficiency was paramount. The engine shared the same 76mm bore and 55mm stroke of the ZX-10R, making it 998 cc's, but the block design is vastly different, and it is machined using a torque plate which simulates the cylinder bore distortion. The ram air intakes fresh air and feeds the compressor, which in turn pressurizes the intake plenum, where 2 injectors per cylinder spray fuel, cooling the intake charge that enters into the combustion chamber. At full tilt, the planetary gear inside of the supercharger provides a ratio of 9.18 times the crankshaft RPM. So when engine RPM reaches 14,000, the impeller speed is approximately 130,000 RPM and produces 35 psi absolute pressure, which is 20 psi gauge at sea level. This was good for 310 horsepower and 156 newton meters of torque, just as much torque as the ZX-14's 1.4 liter engine, but in a 1 liter package. Codename 8200 was more than just its engine. Kawasaki introduced a trellis frame, more commonly seen on Italian bikes like Ducatis, which gave more forgiveness in uneven surfaces. The KHI Aerospace Group helped with the aerodynamics, implementing dog teeth, strakes, and other devices to increase the downforce with minimal air resistance. It was a feat of engineering that would be bestowed with the name H2R. The H2R had one big problem though. It wasn't road legal. It lacked mirrors, headlights, indicators, a catalytic converter for emissions, and road legal tires. Luckily, alongside the release of the H2R, the street legal H2 could be purchased for half the price and much better suited for street usage. The differences at the surface include trading the winglets for mirrors. It included headlights and full catted exhaust with DOT-approved tires, but the differences go deeper when it comes to the engine. The H2 has more docile camshaft duration and lift for mid-range power and decreased emissions. The throttle mapping on the H2's ECU closes the throttle after 10,500 RPM, leading to a flat power curve even as the supercharger is spinning faster. The H2 and the H2R actually have 2 different crankcases with separate part numbers and compression ratios, which goes against the popular belief that the H2 is just a detuned H2R with 100 less horsepower. Regardless of the differences, the H2 after its release would quickly get into the hands of tuners and builders, and the raw potential of the H2 would soon be shown to the world. When flash and throttle restriction removed and using the H2R's freer flowing exhaust, the H2 can bump from a 200 horsepower baseline to 256 horsepower, which even though it's shy of the H2R's output, it's an affordable and street legal-ish alternative that outperforms literally every other street legal bike available when you compare it mod for mod. I mean, it's supercharged at the end of the day. With aftermarket camshafts and the better flowing R cylinder head, fueling upgrades, and 2 more clutch plates like the R, many H2s have eclipsed 300 to 400 horsepower and without needing to spend another 25,000 like the H2R. The H2 was also offered in many flavors, although the nomenclature sometimes gets really confusing. You have the H2 and the H2R, the H2 Carbon, which is a H2 with a carbon cowl and special paint in the serialized plaque. You have the H2SX, which is a touring version of the H2. It's more comfortable, has cruise control, more mid-range torque, and absolutely overhated in the H2 communities, which it's not as bad as everybody says. The H2SX SE, which added more options and launch control. You have the H2SX SE Plus, which offered active suspension, driving modes, and Brembo brakes. The ZH2 and the ZH2 Performance, which is a lightweight Street Fighter version of the H2SX. Yes, as I'm writing this, I'm getting hella confused. In 2019, the H2 got a power bump by 28 horsepower with the help of revised intake and ECU tuning, basically tuning the H2's throttle mapping like the aftermarket. All in all, the H2 was a massive success for Kawasaki, not in sales since the H2 is a high-ticket item, but in brand recognition. Videos of the H2R going 400 kilometers an hour or 240 miles per hour have amassed 50 million plays on YouTube, countless articles praising the H2's performance and engineering prowess while also being decently attainable. Any discussion of fast bikes had on the internet will more than likely mention the Hayabusas, ZX14Rs, and the H2R 99% of the time. While supercharged and turbocharged engines are very rare to find in production sport bikes, they reinforce the age-old ideals that everything is better with a little bit of boost.